So that I don't have any lawsuits, administrative impropriety, nothing right now. That's because the legislation from the chamber allowed you to have an apartment there and receive the housing allowance.
But today your vision of keeping it is a little different.
If I were a congressman today, what would I do? I would take the chamber's apartment, 300 square meters. I would rent mine there and live in the chamber's apartment. Yes, no problem. Now, in the end, it doesn't add up to anything. It doesn't have anything to say. Nothing.
Look, about 2018, since we were talking about that in 2018, you talked a little bit before we started here about the stabbing. Do you think the stabbing was very important for you to get elected? Because it kind of... What happens? Let me build my idea. You come as an anti-PT option at a time when the anti-PT sentiment was very strong. So, even today, people call you a legend and everything, but at that time, it was even stronger. And there was a kind of messiah-like vision of Bolsonaro, which is your name. So, I understand that this stabbing kind of makes you a martyr in life. Do you think it helped you get elected?
Let's get to the facts. In November 2014, I decided to tie the presidential date with Dilma's re-election. And where can I prove that to you? You can go on YouTube. It's worth it. Get people on YouTube, put their Amando, Academia Militar, das Agulhas Negras. In November, there was a graduation ceremony where swords were handed out to the young people who were graduating, aspiring candidates. I was passing by. I went to the academy 4 years ago, and these kids, about 400 of them, were ready to enter Pato to be declared official candidates. I went inside, they beat me up. I know that at graduation people beat me up for anything. I mean, they're dying to leave. 4 years at the academy, man, cool. And then I addressed them. I even talked about my possible death. And I said that I would run for president. We swore our lives for Pato. This video is there. It's a short video. It should be about 40 seconds. And I started my campaign from then on, pre-campaign. When I got home, 2014, November 2014, the election was 4 years later. And I started traveling around Brazil. At first I couldn't believe it. For example, when I arrived alone in Manacapuru, there were about 200 people there at the port. I looked at them and thought, what does this guy think of me? And he must have thought the same thing. What is this crazy guy doing here? And I talked to people from Manacapuru. And I started to travel around Brazil. Then I used that biblical passage from John 8:32 about the truth. And then someone from the press said, look, do you want to be president? And I don't think you will ever be, ever, telling the truth. You have to lie. If you don't promise to do this, do that, fix Brazil from top to bottom, you don't get a vote. So I'd rather not go. And I went to Cuiabá, Mato Grosso. It's worth mentioning this here. You don't have time to end the program, do you?
No, I don't. By the way, you give me a tip there when you're fed up.
No. I arrived at the airport. I held an event. I took 3 hours of photography. I don't know how many photos there were, right? 3 hours of photography. That was my press. That was it. Social media. I arrived at the hotel. 3 stars. Dead. And when you're tired, you don't sleep. Then I'm back. Started talking to the receptionist there, who was everything at the hotel. And that was everything, right? I started talking, Papa, come on. Then I told him to try to win his vote, right? A little vote for president, really important, right? I told him that I was a candidate for president of the Republic. He laughed. I would laugh too. How can a guy become president of the Republic alone in a 3-star hotel, a humble hotel? At that moment, I asked him, what's harder, me being president and you buying this hotel? He was screwed financially. Good. I was also politically unlucky. It was not hard to be president. I ended up being president. I would like to count on this person not to say, look, I'm present, and you continue to take care of the hotel. It is to say, look, you were absolutely right in saying that it was much, much more difficult to be present than the hotel.
Then you'll get there. The guy bought a hotel.
If he bought it, I'm going to beat him up. I'm going to sleep in his hotel. But to show him, when you have faith, you search, you have a purpose, you dedicate yourself, you plan, you achieve your goal. This is a fantastic country. You can get anywhere. I came from the Ribeira Valley, here, the poorest region in the state of São Paulo. The economy is bananas. Eldorado Paulista. I've lived in Ribeira. I've lived in St. Barras. Then I left there, public school, jail turned out. I took the exam for the Army prison school. And when I arrived, 3-4 months later, I was in Campinas. I said, oh, I applied for the wrong school. Then I was repeating the scientific course. You had no information. And then I started studying to apply for the academy. At the end of the year, I applied and went to the academy. So I went. And Dan, you're discrediting yourself. I was a student at the Paratoria school. You just screw yourself in the first year, right? To be a student at the academy in the first year. 2 years of being a bad boy in a row.
A student is worse than a recruit, right?
It's worse than a recruit. It's worse than a recruit because you want to stay there, right? You want to stay. You want to win, right? And if I start telling you the story of my life, then you'll fall backwards. You'll wonder how all this happened to me. For example, when I took the exam, I was in the square in El Dorado Paulista, right? I was with this guy, Celso Gato, a friend of mine, a childhood friend there. Then a lady comes out of the station, calls and says, here you come. Right. I want to talk to you. It was Captain Santos Lima from the Army Preparatory School. Jair said, who said R, right? He has already passed away. He has a son who woke up from the army today. You have until tomorrow to report to rescind. You passed the public exam. Did I pass? If it isn't that lady? But, I opened the door. I was in the square. I wouldn't have gone to the gym. And I went to the gym. Then something cool happened, right?
Then something cool happened.
In the first weeks of class, a teacher came to the blackboard, drew a straight line, and 2 dashes underneath. This is the ground line. Ground line! Ground line, or iron line. Ground line. Ground line. It was descriptive geometry. Those who did the 2nd and 3rd years of the operating school knew what it was. I didn't. Then he started to reflect on plans. 3rd dimension. I went crazy. I said, I'm not going to pass this. I asked there for permission to go back to being a student at the operations school and army prison because I was going to fail. Then a colonel there, a guy called Oliveira, from the psychotechnical service, authorized me, and I went to El Dorado. I took the Comte bus, arrived in El Dorado, and told my father, Dad, I'm going to ask to leave Academia Resende. He didn't even ask why. On the next Kamada bus, you'll go back there and pass the year. I'm back. I was one of the best students in descriptive geometry. So you have one, you go after it, you manage to achieve your goals. I wasn't a brilliant student at the academy. It was in the third year, right? There were 68 in my class. I was 19th. Also, because the description took me a lot of time, I didn't study other subjects. Oh, I was one at the Army Physical Education School. There were 45 lieutenants and captain. I told you, you're one. Huh? You were one. When? I had a difficult diving course at GBS, the Rio de Janeiro Search and Rescue Group. I got there. There was a guy who was already a professional diver. I said, you're one of this guy here. It was one, okay?
I really want to.
You go after it. You go after it. I took care of it. I earned my living in El Dorado, fishing with Gilmar, right? Even I made a mistake in the past with him. I always apologized, right? But he marked me negatively, rightly, about a mistake. I don't want to blame him. Gilmar, my fishing buddy, okay? Usually the thunder would rumble, we would leave school, and the night hours would end, and from midnight to 6, dragging the net. From 6 to 8, cleaning the fish, and from 8 to 10, my 2 sisters and my younger brother would sell fish on the street. The only money I left. I would go to Mr. Lele's cinema, watch Tarzan. Sometimes I would watch the same film twice, and I would root against the alligator that wanted to eat Jane. At that time, eating Jane was eating, biting Jane, swallowing Jane. Today it's a different story. I also bought verses from the encyclopedia to learn. That's where I learned how to make soap, for example. I learned what a spectrum is because people studied the planets. And according to the light, according to the dispersion in the spectrum, you knew what the chemical composition of that planet was. Not that planet, right? The planet has no light of that star. It doing? I was a star. And I kept doing, learning, living, and succeeding in life.
About 2018 still, man. You were elected by electronic voting, right?
Yes, let's talk about that.
Today you hit hard. There was an event there where you called the ambassadors to, basically, badmouth electronic voting machines. But you were elected by electronic voting machines from the beginning, when they were implemented, right?
Look, I presented a project for printed voting back then.
But in 1993 you asked for Sirona Electronica, didn't you?
No, back then, in the beginning, I supported the electron. But you can see,